My name is Jonas Sjosted. I've been asked to speak in our common Nordic language in English. I'll try to do my best doing that. I'm a member of the Swedish Parliament of the Left Party. I was a member of the European Parliament for 11 years, mainly working with environmental issues. I was also in the Swedish No campaign before the referendum way back in 1994, which we narrowly lost to enter into the membership of the European Union. I was also one of the, I would say, leading figures in the campaign in the referendum we had about the euro in 2003 that we won, which quite clearly. And looking back, that was quite an amazing victory for the no side. It was a collision between left and right, you could say, and but we had a yes campaign that had unlimited economic resources, all the main media on its side, the main political parties, the trade unions, the employers, that we managed to win that referendum on the euro in 2003 in Sweden. And today, the debate on the euro is quite different in Sweden compared to Iceland. And today, hardly anyone wants to join the euro any longer. Even the most stern proponents of the European currency today admit that it's an economic advantage for Sweden to have a currency of our own. That it's been an advantage and it will continue to be an advantage. So from a Swedish perspective, the whole issue of joining the single currency, the euro, is, I would say, the issue is politically dead for the foreseeable future. And that, of course, has a lot to do with what will be kind of my main topic, what I will say now. That is the very deep economic crisis that we have in the European Union for the moment, that is closely connected to the development of the euro itself. And I'll try to explain that, and I'll try to end with proposing some alternative policies that I think would be better. This economic crisis that the many parts of the Eurozone faces in the European Union is also a political crisis. It's the deepest crisis that the European Union had been through ever. And I think we only see the start of the economic problems that the Eurozone is in. And I'll come back to why I think it's that way. Of course, after the collapse of Lehman Brothers in the US, some 3 years ago now, we've seen country after country go through very deep and fast economic crisis. Iceland was very early. Of course, you know much more about that than I do. Followed by Latvia, that had a very deep economic crisis, with some similarities to Iceland, but also big differences. Recently, we've seen the Greek economy collapsing about a year ago, and the European Union has to spend 100 billion euros to try to restart the Greek economy. We had a package for Ireland just a couple of months ago with 85 billion euros to try to save the Irish economy after the Irish banking system collapsed and the public economy collapsed as well. Everything points at that we will have Portugal within weeks or maybe months. We'll see the same need for the European Union to go in and build up a package for Portugal. And most likely we'll see more countries coming, maybe Spain, maybe Italy. And when we start to speak about Spain and Italy, we speak about some of the largest economies in the world. They rank like 8th, 9th place in the world. So this shows how severe this economic situation is in the European Union. And to understand this crisis, one of course has to see that they are different from country to country a little bit, but there are some common things that you can see go through as well. First, of course, we have a system of finance, the finance sector and banking. We've seen a very aggressive banking sector. You know all about that in Iceland, I know that. The banks that almost went crazy, but sometimes went criminals, and made people borrow money that they couldn't afford in the end. And combined with that, we've seen in many of these countries that the private sector, I mean the families, has indebted themselves in a way that was not sustainable. And I know you have that situation in Iceland now, that there was no real economic development behind the figures of what the house costed or what some things were sold, the price of things were sold at, etc. So we had this kind of artificial growth and the bubbles made in many countries, Iceland being one of them. Combined to that, we have an underlying problem of the fiscal systems and of that some countries are heavily indebted. Sometimes that is given as an explanation to try to explain the euro crisis. The Greek has borrowed too much money. The Irish hasn't been responsible enough in the public sector, etc., etc. But looking back on the figures, that might be true in some cases, especially Greece, where you had a long period of time where they borrowed too much money and had a very, very bad working taxation system, and they didn't get the money. The people didn't pay the taxes. Large part of the Greek economy was in fact black. The people didn't pay no taxes, and still is. But if you look on many of these countries that are now in deep crisis, Ireland, Portugal, Spain, they have not been heavily indebted when you look at the governments, but they had an indebted private sector. People have been borrowing too much money, especially when it comes to real estate and housing and the rising prices of housing. So that's kind of a bit of a different problem. But I think apart from these quite obvious things, we have an underlying problem in the Eurozone that is maybe more of an explanation to the crisis, and that would be the explanation to why the crisis is so hard to get out. And that is that we have deep imbalances growing in the Eurozone. Because when they fixed the Euro countries into one currency with one interest rate, the economies in the Eurozone still developed in a very different way. In some countries, like especially Germany, the prices didn't rise very much, but the productivity was developed very strongly. In other countries, like in Italy and in Greece, you had a totally different development. You didn't have much of development when it came to productivity, but the prices rised to a German level pretty fast. That meant that the southern, especially economies of the Eurozone, couldn't and cannot compete with Germany, Austria, Denmark that is connected to the Euro, etc. And you can see that on the statistics of the trade and the balances and deficits and surpluses, that these imbalances has grown. And this is a structural imbalance. And if you should solve that, for example, by diminishing the cost of labor in Greece, you would have to cut wages with maybe 30%. Politically impossible to do anything like that. And these structural unbalances in the economy is connected to the euro itself, because they are built upon the fact that you have one interest rate that sort of could make it easier to borrow money in these countries, and you have one fixed value of the currency. You can't let the currency float, you can't devaluate, and that means that the usual ways of getting out of these problems is locked. You're stuck in the problem. That is also why the Eurozone problems most likely will continue for some time. Because even if you solve the urgent crisis when it comes to financing the public debt, you still have the underlying problem of the different development of the economies while having one single currency and interest rate. And that problem is not very likely to go away in the foreseeable future. So the effect now is quite dramatic, and you know about that. We've seen a rise in unemployment in some countries that is absolutely astonishing. If you take Latvia, for example, that has a fixed exchange rate with its currency to the euro, the unemployment is now maybe up to 20%. At the same time, a large part of the younger generation is forced to leave the country. Something like 40 or 50% of school and hospitals are closing down, trying to save money. If you look on what is happening now to public welfare, to unemployment, in many countries, this is dramatic. This is a dramatic social crisis that is coming after the economic crisis. And it's paid by, in many countries, those who has the least possibilities to pay it, by those with low pensions, by those with low pay, those who depend on some kind of social security system. And this crisis that wasn't maybe a crisis of public financing to start with is very fast becoming a crisis of public financing. For example, on Ireland. Ireland had a very low debt of the budget. Now they are so heavily indebted because they had to pay for the bankrupt Irish banks that are all now owned by the Irish state, that they will most likely never be able to pay back. Sooner or later they will have to say, okay, sorry, we cannot pay any longer. So this is the quite dramatic situation that we are in. So there is a debate, has this anything to do with the euro? Or is it mainly something that you can do without the euro? I mean, Iceland is a perfect proof that you can do this without the euro as well, if you make some mistakes and you're a bit unlucky, etc. So it's not as easy as to say that it's the euro's fault. That is making things far too simple. But you can definitely say, I would say that the euro is part of the problem, not part of the solution. And especially part of the problem to get out of the crisis. Because the difference between, for example, Latvia and Iceland is that you have a currency. You have a currency of your own. It lost a lot of its value, but it also means that Iceland once again can compete and sell its product. And when you can't do that, you have to cut the wages, you have to make more dramatic things in domestic policy. So before the crisis, you had a period with the same German, you could say, interest rate all over the Eurozone. And this was, for a while, looked upon as very fortunate. In countries like Ireland, in Spain and in Greece, you could borrow cheap money, you could raise prices, there was a lot of money put into real estate, etc. But this was built on this fake low interest rate on Germany. And what they would have needed to do at that time was to cool down the economy with a higher interest rate. But they couldn't do that because there's only one interest rate in the European Union, that is set in Frankfurt. And what they need to do now is to stimulate the economy with a lower interest rate, while the German economy is now doing very well. So they can't do that. So they are cooling down an economy that is already frozen. So the euro was, in the first phase of the crisis, or before the crisis, a hinder to cool down the economy when you needed to do that. And now it's a hinder with not being able to have an exchange rate and not being able to lower interest rate. It's a hinder to get the economy started again. And that's why the euro is so closely connected to the crisis. And then, of course, these problems of economic imbalances with the extremely strong German export industry, while the import is so dominant in many of the South European countries, is so closely connected to the euro. Because as they can't change the value of their currencies, this will stay like this if they not change the cost of production in the societies. And that is very hard to do. It takes a lot of very unpopular political decisions, takes a lot of social unrest, and it might not even succeed even if you do that.